Good morning. The first item of business today is general questions. Our first question, number 1, from Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with Inverclyde Council to halt population decline in the area.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hasler.
Inverclyde is one of 14 local authorities that experienced depopulation last year. In February, my colleague Ben McPherson met with leaders of a number of local authorities, including Inverclyde, to discuss population decline. A further meeting with me has been agreed for the 27th of September. We need to grow our population to ensure we have sustainable, vibrant communities and drive improvements in inclusive growth. This government has therefore established a cross-portfolio ministerial population task force, which I chair, to identify work which has been taken forward across government to address the challenge of population shifts and changes and identify new actions and intensify existing actions.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply, and the Cabinet Secretary will be aware that population decline is one of, if not the most important challenge that Inverclyde faces in the foreseeable future. But the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that in addition to a consistent and improved marketing strategy to promote Inverclyde, the citing of public agencies can play a part in overturning population decline, and would the Cabinet Secretary consider the citing of public agencies in my constituency?
Cabinet Secretary.
Inverclyde is facing a significant population change. Their figure was the highest, actually, of all the 14 local authorities, a reduction of 0.8%. There isn't going to be one single solution to this issue, but the new population task force, which I'm chairing, will look across all policy areas to see where we can intensify particular work. Some of this will be generational, but some of it can be dealt with sooner rather than later. It is absolutely clear that given that all of our future population growth in this country is projected to come from migration, that the UK's government's proposal to end freedom of movement of people is deeply damaging. Obviously, decisions on the location of public sector functions are taken on a case-by-case basis, and we will consider all opportunities to optimise the benefits of that. But at the same time, we need to ensure that we secure best value for the public finance. The important thing is to make sure that depopulation issues are on the agenda, that we take it seriously, and we do so on a cross-government basis.
Thank you. Question 2, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what measures it is taking to improve GP recruitment and retention in Fife.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
Nationally, we are investing an additional £250 million in direct support for general practice by the end of this parliamentary period, delivering the new GP contract and delivering at least 800 more GPs over 10 years. Scotland, as I'm sure the member knows, has more GPs per 100,000 of the population than the rest of the UK, 92 here, 73 in England, 70 in Wales and 71 in Northern Ireland. In Fife, the Health Board, which has specific local responsibility, is taking a twofold approach, further developing its operational response to issues within practices as they emerge, and taking alongside that a strategic look with a strategic group to ensure a coordinated approach across Fife to those practices that may need additional support. That involves working with GP representatives and the BMA to explore both the implementation and impact of the new contract, but also taking steps locally to increase the attractiveness of general practice, including capitalising on the ScotGem course.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. In my region, surgeries in Perthshire and Fife are either closing or facing closure. And in one example in Dunfermline, 4 GPs are looking after nearly 9,000 patients. That's completely unsustainable. Audit Scotland indicated recently that the lack of workforce planning will mean that the recruitment of 800 new GPs will be fragmented. And for every GP that retires, more than one will need to be trained or recruited to replace them. Therefore, Cabinet Secretary, this crisis is of your government's making. What urgent steps will you now take to rectify this?
Cabinet Secretary.
Before I go on to answer the detail of that, can I just point out to the member that part of the difficulty that GPs and others in our health service is facing are the pension changes that his government at Westminster have enforced on them, which means that actually for some of them it begins to cost them money to come to work. That's hardly a sensible and wise proposition from the UK government, but then increasingly we're getting used to that. In terms of the GP contract, he will know, as members do, that the point of the GP contract is to widen the multidisciplinary team in order to ensure that the GP themselves can concentrate on those patients who need their particular skills and for longer. So that widening of those teams with the recruitment and training of physios, with pharmacy and pharmacological input and so on, is helping to manage the numbers that he is talking about. I take the Audit Scotland report very seriously indeed. We have a number of initiatives. Presiding Officer, I'm mindful of your exhortation not to take too long. I'm sure Mr Stewart knows them. A number of initiatives that we are taking to increase GP numbers, medical undergraduates, the Scott Gem course, increased GP training for medical undergraduates, specific financial support to GP practices, including in rural areas, all of it designed to ensure that we manage that challenge as best we can. And having discussed this morning with one of his colleagues additional steps that we might take, I am, of course, always open to ideas of a positive nature that may come from any benches in this chamber.
Willie Rennie.
The Health Secretary may have seen reports about concerns about the implementation of the GP out-of-hours services new model in St Andrews. The relationship seems to have been broken down between the healthcare partnership and the local campaigners, and they now fear that the partnership are setting this up to fail. Will the Cabinet Secretary investigate this very important matter and provide some assistance?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful to the member for raising that question. I would be very disappointed indeed if what seemed to me a genuine community-devised and community-led solution in terms of out-of-hours services in St Andrews was in any sense now in jeopardy because relationships had broken down or for any other reason. I will certainly look at this with some urgency and ensure that the member and other members affected are informed of what I uncover and what steps we might take to resolve any difficulties that exist.
Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would say to the member Alexander Stewart that if he wished to know what was going on with GP recruitment in Fife and the efforts NHS Fife were taking, he might wish to attend the quarterly meetings that NHS Fife hold with elected members. The Cabinet Secretary referred to the pensions fiasco that the UK Government has created in the health sector. I would have thought that it would be better for the member to seek to work with the Scottish Government and others to try to sort the fiasco that the UK Government has created in that regard and to support constructively the stringent efforts that NHS Fife are taking to try to solve this problem. Thank you.
Well, I thank the member for the contribution. I'm not sure it was a question, actually, more of a... So we'll move on to question 3. Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many arrests were made for offences relating to curb crawling between 2016 and 2019.
Minister Ashton. Then.
Curb crawling, as it's commonly known, is an offence and it's prosecuted under Section 1 of the Prostitution Public Places Scotland Act of 2007. And that Act created 2 offences, that of soliciting and loitering in a public place for the purpose of obtaining the services of someone engaged in prostitution. The Scottish Government does not hold data on arrests made by Police Scotland. However, in 2016-17 and 2017-18, there were 80 offences of soliciting services of a person engaged in prostitution recorded by the police in Scotland. But this number may include offences other than curb crawling.
Ruth Maguire.
Appreciate that answer, Presiding Officer. Does the Minister agree with me that prostitution is a form of men's violence against women? It's a cause and consequence of women's inequality and it makes the world less safe for women and girls. And if so, when will the Scottish Government follow the lead of countries whose action in legislating has reduced violence against women and reduced trafficking by seriously tackling men's demand to purchase sexual access to the bodies of women and girls with legislation?
Minister.
I recognise Ruth Maguire's long-standing interest in this issue and Equally Safe, which is Scotland's strategy for preventing and eradicating violence against women and girls, does adopt the position that prostitution is a form of gendered violence. So in looking at how we should address prostitution in Scotland, I think it is important that we learn from the different approaches which have been adopted internationally and what the impacts have been. So last month I visited Sweden to learn more about their approach to criminalising the purchase but not the sale of sex I met with representatives from the Swedish Government, the police, prosecutors and also support services. Information gathered from that visit will help to develop our approach to prostitution. But I'm also pleased to say that, as published in the programme for government this week, the Scottish Government will be bringing forward a consultation to gather views on Scotland's approach to tackling prostitution, and views will also be sought around reducing the harms associated with prostitution and supporting women to exit.
Question number 4, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to include third sector organisations in its plans to tackle the rise in drug and alcohol related to deaths.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
Thank the member for his question. Obviously, I have a statement later this afternoon, so I will try to avoid topics that will be covered there. The Scottish Government recognises and welcomes the support third sector organisations offer. They play a key role developing the alcohol and drug strategy, Rights, Respect and Recovery, published in November 2018, and we're now working with stakeholders, including the third sector, to finalise an action plan to support the strategy, which will be published in October. Third sector organisations are members of national working groups which advise ministers and provide advice in areas addressing stigma, workforce development and quality principles. They are also represented on the Drugs Deaths Task Force, which will coordinate and drive action to improve health outcomes, reducing the risks of harm and death, and which I will speak more about this afternoon.
Brian Whittle.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? And I wonder if he would agree with me that there are many third sector organisations who have the experience and capacity to tackle prevention of drug issues upstream, and therefore will the Scottish Government commit to ensuring there is an adequate proportion of funding that takes advantage of that experience?
Minister.
In my capacity since coming into position as Minister for Public Health, Sport and Wellbeing, I've visited a huge number of third sector organisations and other organisations, and what I always see is when those organisations are working in partnership with the public services, then they really are able to provide services which are welcomed by the community. So I do think it's important that we appropriately support organisations and making sure we get the best possible treatment. One of the organisations that I know Mr Whittle has visited, that I visited earlier last year, was River Garden, which is an absolutely excellent example of a third sector organisation taking forward a groundbreaking principle. I think it's the first such example across these islands, and I'm really pleased that the Scottish Government were able to support River Garden to the tune of £125,000.
And Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister advise the Chamber as to how many drugs deaths were caused not by illegal but by legally prescribed drugs last year, such as sleeping pills, antidepressants, etc., and how third sector organisations can assist in raising awareness of these dangers?
Minister.
The Scottish Government listens to experts from third sector organisations and other partners. Working with partners, we provide relevant and targeted information to the public to raise awareness of the dangers, to improve health outcomes and to reduce the risks of harm and death. National Records for Scotland drug-related deaths report does not link prescribing data, therefore it's not possible to identify where a drug prescribed to a person was implicated in their death. NRS do, however, produce supplementary tables that show drug-related deaths by drug type. This shows that for 2018 there were no related drugs where the category of antidepressants were either implicated or potentially contributed to the death, the drug-related death. However, other drugs, for example paracetamol, were either implicated in or potentially contributed to a drug-related death in 23 cases. The NRS supplementary information lists nearly 250 drug types, and I'll write to the member with a fuller answer in due course.
Neil Findlay.
The reality is that third sector organisations and many other organisations are stretched to the max by the drugs crisis we have, and they are grossly underfunded. Today, the West Lothian Courier highlights that in the county, only 39% of patients are being seen within 3 weeks by the local drug and alcohol services. NHS Lothian say this is because of capacity and staffing issues. Given that we have 1,200 people dying on the streets, does the Minister think that a paltry 10 million additional resources is adequate to deal with the carnage that we are seeing on the streets of Scotland today?
Minister.
I'm pleased to have been informed that specifically in terms of West Lothian there are plans in place to improve waiting times. Clearly the waiting times there are not good enough. However, across Scotland waiting times have been improving, and that includes across NHS Lothian area. But clearly the waiting times that people are experiencing in West Lothian are not acceptable and need to improve.
Question number 5, Gordon Lyndhurst.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the recent SQA exam results and whether they reflect the strength of the education system.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, Scotland has a high-performing education system with credible and respected national qualifications, resulting in approximately 3/4 of candidates at higher securing a pass at A to C. We've seen an increase in entries, passes and pass rates in National 5, including a rise of 4.4% in passes for English and 1.3% for maths. The results include a range of successes beyond national qualifications, including over 54,000 skills-based qualifications, more than double the level achieved in 2012. This shows that the education system provides learners with much more choice than ever before, allowing them to find the right pathway that is correct for them.
Gordon Lyndhurst.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but we have just seen the second worst results at National 5, the worst results at Higher, and that's the 4th year of decline, and the worst results at Advanced Higher. Now, the Cabinet Secretary was quick to take credit when pupils performed well previously. Will he now accept responsibility for these worse results and also the SNP's cuts to teacher numbers and subject choice limitations, which are holding back our young people from achieving?
Cabinet Secretary.
Mr Lyndhurst should know me well enough to know that I take responsibility for my actions as a minister, but I'm also prepared to take responsibility and the pride for what our young people in Scotland achieve. And 75% of candidates are achieving a pass at higher rate, and for the Conservatives to scoff at that is the wrong approach for the Conservatives to take. If the exam pass rate was continually to be increasing, the Conservatives would be the first people telling us that the exams were not rigorous enough, as Liz Smith was trying to tell us yesterday about National 4. So there will be volatility in exam results year on year in a high-performing education system, and we should celebrate the achievement of young people in Scotland.
Question 6, Jamie Halker-Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government how ministers ensure that they engage with the public in all parts of Scotland, including the Highlands and Islands.
Cabinet Secretary Aileen Campbell.
Thank you. The Scottish Government is committed to ensuring the voices of communities and businesses across Scotland are heard and included in the development of Scottish Government policy. This is enabled through ambitious community empowerment legislation, targeted community-led initiatives, consultations on specific policy proposals, and through Scotland's Rural Parliament. Ministers engage with the public in all parts of Scotland in the course of their ministerial duties. For example, travelling cabinets are an important example of the First Minister's commitment for the Government to be open and accessible. These events, 17 of which have been held in the Highlands and Islands since 2008, have enabled ministers to engage directly with members of the public who can meet and question ministers about local, national and international issues that matter to them in a public forum.
Jamie Halker-Johnson.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Cabinet Secretary will have noticed the First Minister's 3 visits to Shetland during the recent by-election campaign. That's as many trips as there have been official visits by SNP First Ministers to Shetland during the whole of the 12 years of government. That's why many local people in Shetland and in other communities across my region feel this Scottish Government is only interested in them where there's votes to be won. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell me whether communities in my region can hope to see a little more of government ministers, including the First Minister, visiting them outside of campaign periods? And when they do visit, that they will commit to properly consult and to listen and to act on the many local concerns those communities have?
Cabinet Secretary, if you heard the question.
I didn't catch all he said, but I certainly would want to make the point that this government acts on behalf of every community in all parts of the country and does so and takes that interest very seriously indeed. I should also point out that one of the first acts I did in this post was to visit Shetland Council and to engage with them thoroughly. I should also point out that my in-laws are from Shetland, my husband's a Shetlander, so I think he's picked the wrong person to not be engaging with the matter of visits to Shetland.
I'm delighted to see people are in good spirits today.